All right. Welcome to the 44th Annual Old Dominion University Literary Festival. Our theme this year, Afterwards, highlights work that addresses the storms of past and present and the changes wrought upon us as we turn to face the future. I'm Ken Wascom, co-director of the festival, along with my colleague Catherine Jackson, and we'd like to thank you all for being here today, in person as well as virtually. Quick technical note before we begin. Facebook, where this event would be streaming, is apparently down. So we're also streaming live to YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, please feel free to leave your questions for the Q&A portion of the event in the comments. Ordinarily, this would be where I'd slide off stage and turn things over to an introducer, but because both of our readers are Old Dominion University faculty members and people who I am absolutely honored and privileged to call friends as well as colleagues, I'll be doing the introductions myself. First, Sherry Reynolds. Sherry's newest novel, The Tender Grave, was released in March of 2021. She's the author of the novels Bitterroot Landing, The Rapture of Canaan, which was an Oprah Book Club selection and a New York Times bestseller, A Gracious Plenty, Firefly Cloak, The Sweet In-Between, The Homespun Wisdom of Myrtle T. Cribb, and the play Orabelle's Wheelbarrow. Sherry teaches creative writing and literature at ODU here in Norfolk, Virginia, where she currently serves as Department Chair of English and keeps us all well and in line. She lives in the town of Cape Charles on Virginia's eastern shore. Following Sherry, certainly not least, Benjamin Nakaseti Kingsley was born of two true tempered wheelbarrow factory workers and belongs to the Onondaga Nation of Indigenous Americans in New York. He is the Afro-Latin author of the collections Demos, An American Multitude, published by Milkweed this very year, Colonize Me, published by Saturnalia in 2019, and Not Your Mama's Melting Pot from the University of Nebraska Press in 2018. He is the recipient of fellowships from the Provincetown Fine Arts Work Center, Tickner Center, and Kundiman, among others. His recent work has been published in The Breakfast Poets, Latinx, Native Voices Honoring Indigenous Poetry, the Georgia Review, Kenyon Review, Oxford American, Poetry Magazine, and Tin House. Again, thank you all for being here for this fabulous reading. I'd like to welcome to the stage Sherry Reynolds.
Hello, everybody. It is a treat to be with you. It's a treat to get to do this in person. I thank you for coming out and celebrating our literary festival with us. I am honored to have a chance to read again and to see your sweet faces out there, masked though they are. You look good in your masks. This novel, y'all, I didn't know if I'd get another novel, but here we got one. So The Tender Grave just came out in March, and it's a unique experience to publish a book during a pandemic, and there have been very few in-person events. So again, I really appreciate you being here. Thank you to Kent and Catherine for putting this festival together for us under some tricky circumstances. Thank you to Dean Jonathan Lee for being here and for supporting us. Thank you to the ODU bookstore and Mark Katz and crew for selling books down here. And so I'm going to jump in. I'm going to read to you for about 20 minutes. And I'm going to read you a little section from the very beginning, and then I'm going to jump ahead. I'm going to need these to do it clearly. So my book, let's see. My book is a story about two sisters. Their names are Dory and Teresa, and at the beginning of the book, they've never met. Dory is 17 years old, and she's committed a hate crime against a gay boy at her school. And she has run away to escape prosecution. And she goes to find her older half-sister from her mom's previous marriage. That's Teresa. So this is a section when she has just arrived in the town where Teresa lives. She's been dropped off by the transit van at the harbor, and she is working up her nerve to go and introduce herself to her half-sister. Alrighty, so here we go. Right in the middle of a scene. She's at the harbor, she's at the beach, and there's a little boy named Randy that she has met, and she's trying to get some peace and trying to just sort of collect her thoughts, and this little kid has been interrupting her and talking to her. Hey, he called, what's your name? She wondered if she should make up a name, but in the end she told the truth. You want to be my girlfriend? He asked. I'm too old for you, she said and laughed. She was 17, but could pass for 20. Besides, I got a boyfriend already. Just thinking of him made her choke. The boy shrugged and said, that's okay. I'll show you my hideaway anyhow. He led her up the bank to the hot place where the high tide couldn't reach, talking all the while. Dory was glad to be distracted. They stepped over rocks and broken bricks, then to hot sand pocked with holes from ghost crabs shying from the sun. Creeper vines and grasses masked a place where trees had tipped over, leaving wiggly roots partially exposed and partially embedded in the ground. Trees with scoliosis, their lowest branches grew against the sand. The boy pushed back some vines to reveal a shady, shallow cave beneath one tree's contorted branches. Come on in, he said. He had a little braided rug in there and some plastic army men he kept inside a rusted cookie tin. He crouched on the rug, and Dory sat beside him, and he introduced her to his army. The vines and leaves against her neck kept making her think there were spiders on her. Again and again, she slapped at nothing. You come here every day, she asked. Just Sundays, said the boy. My granny's sick, so we bring her groceries every Sunday. Then me and Daddy come down here and crab, while Mama visits and rolls her hair. Oh, she said. Does your granny live here too? No, said the girl. She didn't mention her older half-sister. She hoped her sister hadn't moved. She had a name and an address memorized long ago from an envelope with a postmark so faded you could hardly read it. As soon as she worked up her courage, she planned to scope things out. I'll show you where my granny lives, the boy offered. It ain't far. So she followed Randy out of the cave, and he led her down to the water and then around some rocks and back to sand again. From there, he pointed out a small bungalow that sat alone about a quarter-mile inland, huddled between squatty, fat trees at the far edge of the town. That's my granny's house, he said. Does she live there by herself, Dory asked. Yep, said the boy. Maybe you should move her to the nursing home so she can hang out with other old people. She's too old and set in her ways, said the boy. She don't even go to church no more. Only place she goes is to therapy to get her broke shoulder worked on. Every Tuesday morning at 11. You ever been to therapy? No, she said. It feels good, he said. Some Tuesdays I sneak on the table next to my granny and let the therapist stretch all my muscles. The boy's father called to him again. Randy, get over here. You better go, Dory said. He sounds mad. But Randy didn't hurry. He just shrugged and made squiggles in the sand with his toes. If you be my girlfriend, he said, I'll tell you a secret. You're a mess, said Dory. I already told you I got a boyfriend. You wouldn't want me to two-time him, would you? Well, yeah, said Randy. It's a really good secret. Okay, she said, just tell me. Randy grinned. Back before I was born, he said, when I was still in my mama's belly, I had a pair of magic flip-flops, but they fell off when I was coming out. Oh, yeah, said Dory. They're probably still in my mama's belly somewhere. If I had them flip-flops, I could jump from here to that pier way down yonder. He pointed to a place so far down the beach that you could barely make out the people fishing. Just leap right up and land way over there. I need me some shoes like that, Dory said. I still remember them, Randy told her, from when I was a tiny baby, not even yet born. So I'm going to jump ahead now, put on my magic flip-flops, and leap on about 100 pages in this book. And all you really need to know here is that Dory does find her sister. She stays with her sister and her partner for about 5 days, but then they get into a huge fight, and Dory takes off and leaves. And she has nowhere to go and no money, and so she ends up breaking into granny's house. And she does it while the granny is at PT. She's remembered that she goes on Tuesdays at 11. And so she goes into the granny's house and she steals money and a handgun and all of her pills and her jewelry. And so, and finally, she takes a picture of little Randy from his school picture from the refrigerator. So those are the things that she takes with her. And I'm going to jump on up here ahead when Dory has, she has gone up the road. She's taken the transit van as far north as it'll go, I think. And I wrote it, but I'm not sure. She took the transit van way on up the road there. And then, and she gets off and she's rented a motel room. Okay, so this is where we're picking up with Dory. Dory had saved some Percocet for herself. She'd earned them. While she was waiting for her pizza to be delivered, she took 2 and sat in the hot bathtub, letting the delicious Percocet fog descend and wrap around her. At last she could relax, and all the meanness in her could sweat right out through her pores. She was a nicer person on Percocet. If she had her own prescription, she could be the Blessed Virgin Mary. She didn't feel angry with Teresa anymore. She didn't feel angry with her boyfriend Kane. Even if he'd ratted her out, it would only be an act of fear, a pathetic attempt to save his own hide. And Owen Howe, poor Owen, she hoped they were giving him plenty of Percocet in his IV drip. She closed her eyes and imagined herself in the ICU on the gurney next to Owen. "Hey, Owen," she said, "I know you can hear me. I walked into your future," she said, "and I wanted to tell you that things are going to turn out all right." It sounded silly when she said it. She snorted and quickly covered her mouth so the nurses wouldn't hear. "Owen," she whispered, "I'm sorry. I really fucked up." Though she was high, she still meant it. Maybe she had to be high in order to even say it. "You didn't deserve that," she told him. "I'd take it back if I could." But she couldn't take it back. She wished he'd say something or at least acknowledge her. Sometimes she felt so invisible and it was impossible to tell whether she was being ignored or if she'd never been seen to begin with. "You just need to get to New York City," she told him. "Nobody will hate you there. You can wear a rainbow flag in New York City if you want to." In her mind, she gave Owen Howe a pair of magic flip-flops, rainbow flip-flops with big white daisies between the toes. She imagined Owen kicking off the sheet from the hospital bed, standing up and leaping out the window and off to New York City, where things were certain to go his way from that moment on. When the pizza man banged at her door, Dory didn't bother with putting on her clothes. She just spun herself up in a sheet, smiled at him, and gave him an enormous tip. She couldn't change what had happened with Owen, but she could change what she did forever after. She vowed to give big tips from then on. She knew the Percocet was a temporary state, but it reminded her that there was another way to feel. She wasn't even angry with her mom anymore. She wished her mom a happy life. She took a slice of pizza and held it up to her mom like a toast. "Have a happy life, Mommy," she said. That night she slept without dreaming, and the next day she woke up feeling fine. She took another Percocet, just one, and walked over to the convenience store a quarter-mile down the highway and bought a half-gallon of strawberry ice cream. It was the perfect breakfast. She ate it with a plastic spoon right out back of the convenience store at a wooden picnic table. She let the ice cream drip and smear all over her face since she didn't have napkins to wipe it with, and it felt good. The coldness and the stickiness both. It made her feel like she was 4, and she imagined she looked beautiful, childlike but sensual. If any pedophiles could see her, they wouldn't be able to stand it. The store clerk came out for a cigarette break and said, "Ooh, girl, you got trouble, don't you?" "No," said Dory, "I'm fantastic." She licked her spoon and waved it in the air like a wand. "You got anywhere to go?" the clerk asked. She was a skinny woman with two-toned hair and an infected eyebrow piercing. "Yes," said Dory. She laughed and spooned the melted remains from the sides into her mouth. "When I'm done with my breakfast, I'm headed to the library. I need to check my email." "Nearest library is 20 miles south," said the clerk. "But if you give me a couple of what you're taking, I'll let you use the internet here, long as you don't steal nothing." Owen Howe was dead. He'd been dead 3 days already. Kane had been charged with murder, along with his cousin, who hadn't even been there, or at least he wasn't there when Dory left. Both of them were pleading not guilty. According to 2 different news sites, she was wanted for questioning, but wasn't considered a suspect. A lot of people were worried that she'd been the victim of foul play. Rumor had it they found evidence at the crime scene, though in the interests of the larger investigation, police would either confirm or deny it. In an interview, her weeping mother speculated that maybe Dory had been hurt that night, that those boys had killed her and thrown her body in the river. The police department spokesman pointed out conflicting testimonies and conflicting stories. It didn't help that all the testimonies came from people whose judgments were impaired. Dory turned down the volume on the computer, but listened to the news reports from back behind the counter next to the lottery machine. Just down the way, on her stool, the store clerk nibbled Doritos and attended to customers. She was in her own Percocet wonderland by then. Thanks, Dory said to the store clerk, and she ran all the way back to her motel room to pack. She intended to get on the road, head north, do whatever she had to make it to Maryland at least. But how long would it be before the news became national? Would it spread beyond North Carolina? Would they put her on Dateline? The ice cream had upset her stomach, and she spent the next couple of hours on the toilet. When the maid tried to clean her room, she sent her away. The spasms in her colon gave her the cold sweats. They went on a long time, and she knew she deserved it for her part in killing Owen Howe. They'd killed him, or at least he died. She didn't know for sure if they'd killed him. Maybe it was all the alcohol, or maybe he'd choked on his own puke, or maybe something else had happened after she left the camper and drove Kane's truck back to his house. Weren't her fingerprints all over that truck? But if investigators checked the truck, of course they'd find her fingerprints there, her DNA. She rode around in that truck all the time. She'd had sex in that truck earlier the same night. Maybe her boyfriend and his cousin had killed her. Maybe she was dead, and only her miserable, confused soul had gone roaming off to Virginia to find her long-lost sister, looking for sympathy anywhere she might get it. She felt crazy and desperate and didn't know what to do. She pulled out the gun she'd stolen from Randy's granny. She didn't know much about guns. This one looked old-fashioned, like the ones from westerns or gangster flicks. But it didn't have that hammer thing to cock, so she wasn't even sure it was real, and she wasn't sure how to shoot it. Part of her was scared to play with it, but even if it went off, what difference did it make? It wasn't like she had anything left to live for. What good was her life if she'd taken a life? What if Owen was meant to be something special, like the president, and now she'd ruined it? She climbed up onto the vanity and sat cross-legged in front of the mirror, watching herself play with the gun, like she was in a movie or something. If somebody made a movie of her life, would she die in that scene? Or would the filmmaker think she might have potential too? She fiddled with the lever on the side of the gun and released the cylinder, where she found 5 bullets, one in every chamber, but they looked a little corroded. She clicked the cylinder back into place and pressed the barrel against her temple just to feel it there. She made faces at herself, sad, pouty ones, horrified, stricken ones. She bulged her nostrils, stuck out her tongue, then put the gun down. She had bags under her eyes and a huge zit on her forehead, but she was still too cute to die right that minute. Besides, if she died, she didn't want to look gross when the authorities found her. She was sorry, though, that she'd left Owen Howe looking gross when the authorities found him. She could imagine how humiliating that would be, and then she wanted to die again for humiliating Owen, in addition to killing him. And then she took some tramadol, because she was all out of Percocet. But tramadol was better than nothing. When she reached the end of the transit line, she started hitchhiking north. She should have known better than to get into a Volvo station wagon with a middle-aged woman, but as soon as the car slowed down and pulled off the asphalt, she'd run to catch up. She'd have been safer with a trucker, because this woman just wanted to drive her to the YWCA shelter. She was a feminist. She had a bumper sticker that claimed girls could do anything. But she also had a great big diamond ring on her finger. She was owned and didn't even know it. From a young age, Dory had figured out that you should never trust a woman who has her mind made up about what you need. Men might fuck you, but 9 times out of 10, they had absolutely no interest in you beyond your body. The danger men posed was physical, but usually minimal. Women, on the other hand, would fuck you 6 ways to Sunday and expect you to say thank you when they're done. A woman's will is her dick. Dory told the woman in the Volvo that she didn't need the helpline for survivors of domestic violence, and she certainly didn't need the Department of Social Services or the police. But this woman wouldn't shut up. She knew people to call to help drug addicts if Dory had a problem with addiction. She shouldn't feel ashamed. She should get the help she needed and deserved. Her church sponsored a soup kitchen for the homeless if Dory was hungry, if Dory needed a place to go. "I'm not an addict," Dory proclaimed. She said it slowly, in case she might be slurring by accident. Her tongue felt dry and thick. "I'm not homeless." If she didn't get out of that car soon, she'd be somewhere she didn't intend. The road went on and on with just fields and trees, occasional churches and lawnmower repair shops. Finally, they came to a big poultry processing plant and had to stop for a red light. Dory hopped out before the tires quit rolling. As she leaped through tall grasses along the roadside, jumped the ditch all littered with chicken feathers and trash, and disappeared into trees, she could hear the woman yelling out that window for her to come back. Dory stumbled between pines through overgrown bushes for a while, then into a clearing and out the other side to a country road. The whole world smelled like singed feathers and raw meat. The sun had dropped low, and since she wasn't sure what to do, she kept on walking. She could see a church set back off the road, so she headed there. Even if churches were magnets for hypocrites, they seemed safer than the rest of the world. This one took the prize for the ugliest church she'd ever seen, and she'd seen some ugly ones. It clearly belonged to a poor congregation, probably the workers at the local deboning factory, and it looked as though it had been built without the help of any architect. The walls a combination of cinder block and clapboard, the tiny windows asymmetrical and positioned too close to the roof for anybody to look out or break in. In the back, there was a small fenced-in playground with a couple of swings and a bunch of plastic sun-faded toys. But off to one side, a giant oak tree with sprawling branches stretched up some 60 feet toward the sky. About a third of the way up there was a treehouse. Dory let herself into the playground and climbed directly up the wooden rungs hammered into the trunk. Someone had put old church pews up there, 4 of them, around the edges and bolted to the platform. The seats faced in, so that if you sat down properly, you'd be worshiping the tree. It struck her as funny. The treehouse was better designed than the church. She turned long ways on her pew, stretching her legs and using her tote bag as a backrest. She looked out beyond the church roof with its patchwork shingles and across the nearby fields of hay and soybeans. In the distance, little rundown houses sat here and there beneath the darkening sky, randomly speckled over that land. And she knew that inside those houses, people were fighting with one another, praying, eating their supper. People were paying bills and fucking and watching TV, celebrating birthdays and considering suicide, probably thinking they lived independent lives when they were separated from one another by nothing but a little space, the flimsiest walls and doors. They all lived beneath the same clouds, got bitten by the same hungry mosquitoes. Dory was one of them, even though she didn't know them and never would. She slapped at a mosquito on her forearm, but missed. The bones of her spine ached from pressing against the hard pew. Her dad used to say that church pews were supposed to be uncomfortable, that they were designed that way by God to make your tailbone thrive so you wouldn't doze off during the sermon. If she was going to sleep there, she needed to get comfortable. She loosened the buttons on her jeans and emptied her pockets of Randy's school picture and his granny's rings. She slipped the rings on her finger. They fit just fine. If she died that night up in the tree, then when somebody found her, they'd think she was a married lady. But what in the world would a respectable married lady be doing dead in an oak tree, holding a little boy's picture? Dory rolled to her side and watched a line of black ants parading down the tree, and she wondered if they were done with their workday and headed back to the colony, or if they'd soldier on in the dark, collecting leaves or fungus or whatever they were after. Her mom had told her once, "You think you're so important, but you're not. You're just a little old ant crawling around on the floor. One day you'll get stomped and die, and the world will keep right on turning." It had upset her back then, thinking of herself as a squashed speck of ant, but now it wasn't such a bad feeling. If she was so unimportant, then nothing she did could matter very much or for very long. What harm could one little ant do in the world? Even the worst ant couldn't do that much harm. But she'd read there were more than 1 million ants for every person on the planet, so even if an ant did a little bit of harm, it could add up fast. She studied Randy's picture and pretended he was her own little boy. She hoped nothing bad would ever happen to him, like what happened to Owen Howe. Randy was such a funny kid with his magic flip-flops. He reminded her of the kid she might have been if she hadn't become the person she'd become. Randy had to be more than a little old ant, didn't he? And she had to be more than a little old ant if she brought down Owen Howe, another person. And not just another person, but a member of the National Honor Society and the Drama Club. He'd played King Lear the year before. He'd done a really good job. Owen had to be more than a little old ant, and they'd snuffed him out for no good reason at all. And what could she possibly do about it? Even if she turned herself in, it wouldn't bring him back. As porch lights came on in the distance, Dory felt darker and darker in her heart. She took off her belt and looked for a good branch to hang herself, but she couldn't go through with it. She didn't have the nerve, and her belt was too short anyway. Besides that, she was too scared to leave this life without repenting, and she didn't know how to repent. Saying sorry wasn't enough. Up there in the tree, she cried a long time, letting her shoulders and lungs get in on the tragedy. It was a tragedy, all of it. The word tragedy hadn't really meant anything to her before. It was a term to memorize for an English test. It was something that happened to Oedipus, not something that happened to regular old people. But now that Owen Howe had died, Dory understood it differently. Tragedy was deep, multifaceted, and contagious. She hadn't created the tragedy of Owen Howe. He'd been living his tragedy for years before she met him. But she recognized tragedy in him, was drawn to it, participated in it, and was infected by it. Even though Owen was dead, Dory would carry his tragedy for the rest of her life, all tangled up with her own. She saw that her life had been a tragedy too. It had nothing to do with what she deserved. She was born into it. Her very selves carried the guilt of her parents, the heaviness of choices that were made before even they were born. Denying it wouldn't help, and there was certainly no curing it. Tragedy permeated everything it touched, and it touched in ways that couldn't be seen, like fungus spreading in dark gaps beneath the bark of a stately oak. It was intergenerational, epidemic. No wonder the Greeks loved to write about it. But what did you do with it? The cruelty she took out on Owen Howe was the same cruelty she'd been taking out on herself all her life. She'd wanted to kill Owen, and Cain for that matter, because she wanted to die all her life. It was so sad what she'd done, what had been done to her. She had no tissues to blow her nose, so she let it run and run. The night grew darker, and a breeze came up that left her chilled. She peeked through the slats of the treehouse floor, down to the ground, where lightning bugs flitted and flirted, blinking their green-gold glow, little promises of light in the dark. In a while, she fell asleep up there, on a church pew high in an oak tree, wearing stolen wedding rings. Her fingers relaxed around Randy's picture, and the wind blew it out of her hand. Thank you. Thank you. And now we have Jen Kingsley.
Okay, let me fix this beard here first. Ooh, there we go. Okay. Can you hear me? Yeah. All right. I'm going to try and keep it short and sweet. No, not very sweet. Short and sad. Welcome to poetry. Short and sad. I also had a book come out just this March, and it's super wonderful to see all of y'all's faces because I have been doing like a dozen Zoom readings. Ugh. So even though I'm seeing half of your face, that's still so wonderful. I'm still loving that. And to some of my students who I see in the audience, this is what I'm working with. This is my face. You're now seeing my face for the first time. I hope it did not disappoint. But I cannot give you any of your money back. Cool. Speaking of sad, the opening of my book, Demos or Demos, a Greek root word for democracy, it begins with the acknowledgement section. Oftentimes, the book will have the acknowledgements section at the end. I decided to begin with it. This is a little bit of show and tell. You're so far away, you won't be able to see this at all. But there's a picture here of a wooden jail cell in Japan, and my grandmother, Matsumi Hasebe, is inside of it. And I'll get to that in 1 second. Before anything, acknowledgement. Thank you, firstly, to my Obasan, grandmother Matsumi Hasebe, who taught me that if a tyrant's narrative can be a well-formed prison, a poem can be a creature of protesting fire inside of that prison. Thank you for your father, Naka Hasebe, his fire, his poem that would put him behind the exactness of these very wooden bars. See the warhorse cry, he wrote, in defiance of an imperialist Axis nation's sun god, Emperor Hirohito. And here is that jail cell. Underneath it, it says, Matsumi Hasebe, January 4th, 1989, in Tomei Police Station, behind the same wooden bars that imprisoned her father in embattled World War II Japan. The political prisoners greatly feared a fire, as they would surely burn alive inside of their wooden cages. Many of their homes had already been burned, including my grandmother's childhood home in the great capital F firebombing of Tokyo, the single most destructive bombing raid in human history. Such great American butchery that bomber pilots had to apply their oxygen masks to keep from vomiting as they were hit by the reek of burning flesh, charcoaled corpses, and clouds of civilian blood. So thank you to my grandmother, whose tradition I'm trying to write in. The first poem, as I'm thinking about what it means to be American, am I American, I don't fit, how would I say it, very neatly into our intersectional hierarchy. So on my mother's side, my mother is half Onondaga and half Japanese, and my father is half Cuban and half Appalachian. So I'm kind of a little bit of everything, a little bit of nothing. Where do I fit in? You see how the tension would arise. This first poem is called American Multitude. From the languages of my Haudenosaunee Onondaga Nation. As everything begins with the heart, beat of horses, a tribe the thudded color of all creation. My people gather, brindle, as if the night were drizzled long across their backs. She of sickle sword, of tendon and tusk, he who wields the ox goad, fresh jawbone from a filly in heat. They who buck the binary, Tikeni Sonizura, too spirited, a young soul miracles, how many? How many ghosts can fit inside my people? Gather, brindle, as if the night were not yet gelded. My people gather as if the night were a suckling for the saber-toothed drum. The whistle of pipes, crescentic and long, hatchet my people. Gather as if the night were only a splintered thing, bent about the glory of our now dawning home. The second poem that I have for you is called Nantucket Sleigh Ride. And I hope you're thinking, what the hell is a Nantucket sleigh ride? And so I put this quote right after the title for you. This quote is from Browning Tyler, a grandson of a Nantucket whaler, 81 years old. Quote, when you harpoon a whale, it bucks harder than a freight train off rails. It dives down deep as it can go and takes your boat with it, fast. And that's the, quote, sleigh ride, end quote. That last fighting gasp of Leviathan through the sea. You know the whale metaphor. You know all about the beaten horse. Write this off as just another dead animal poem. Or dying, know that my people weren't neatly arced by America 2 by 2. White boys named Noah harpooned our asses by the tens, by the thousands, collared our necks with barbs and slugged lead into our head when we bucked. They dove in after our oil and the good fat of our plains from sea to shining sea. Now here we all are, a tangle of corpses. Together we, crabs, in a clawed bucket list. Cross off every other kind and colony, colonize the crevice between my brown lungs. Cremate me in ashy anonymity before I surface, I breathe, I war. Now I'm going to jump around just a little bit. Let me check the time. I don't want to commit the cardinal sin of going over time. The title of this poem is Dialogue, and this is some dialogue that I got in creative writing workshop a lot. So this poem, the title begins with, quote, "Write about being triracial," end quote, says that guy from workshop. Write about being triracial, says that guy from workshop. I was born what I am in ash, under cigarette flick, bellied beneath Pennsylvania roadside diner bulbs. I was born cooking, leftover ingredients. A little of this, a little of a half I was. Born scraps, stirred see-through in Pyrex. I was born dribbled from God's measuring. Cracked lip I was, born runny, eggs in a black skillet. Though I was not yellow enough for yolk, not black enough to be burnt, not even brown enough to be sizzle-whispered all the way. I was born trying to pass off the problem of not being born a breakfast food at all. My hatred of egg whites the worst, their gluiness stuck in the front of my throat. In the consonants of my captors, you shake your head, you say, "Ben, Ben, race is not extended food metaphor." I say, what if it's true? I was born in the morning on a cold bed of coffee grounds, crawling on eggshells. I say, you tell me how I was born, what I am. All right. Before I moved here 2 years ago, I lived in Baltimore. I hadn't seen The Wire yet, so I threw a dart whenever I moved to Baltimore, wherever rent was cheapest, and I ended up in West Baltimore, right where The Wire was filmed, 2 blocks away from where the, I believe, 2017 Freddie Gray riots began. And at this time, I had the shittiest car you can imagine. The AC didn't work, whatever the fancy car guy word for what cools the engine, that didn't work. The driver's side window didn't roll down, so when I was driving to teach in the summer and it was raining, I would just sweat a ton. It was terrible. I was so happy to get rid of that car. But I had that car, it was a good car, it got me where I needed to go, and for all of its shittiness, it was a chef's kiss, Mercedes-Benz. All right, this poem is called Out My Apartment Window, West Baltimore, August 2 a.m. I spread the blinds with sleepy fingers, 3 boys and a lookout fourth. None old enough to drive the car they're prowling around. My Marlboro-colored sedan, a Benz 20-something years old and seated atop bald wheels, soggy under the weight of rain and faded parking lot lights. I think more and more she's the one thing my father left me I've ever really used. It's a hell of a time they're having, attempt after attempt to pry the ornament from hood, paint peeled, chipped enough to reveal the gray of stone beneath. 5 minutes of sneakers mounted on her grill and a flurry of whimpering tugs. It's a real sword in the stone scenario. I lay back down in bed and hope within an anvil of heart that one boy will free the silver, and to him it will be Excalibur, and he will brandish the star, the ornament, the sword, long as a boy can. Understand, there is no outstretched arm, no lady hidden in a crystal-misted lake. Every old white wizard would see you burned alive. Here, no Merlin will shoulder the spell of all your weight. With your own arm you cut, with your own arm you take. Here we get after our own. From the gray of stones we pry, we pull each jewel of light. Here we forge our own, bodies laid long upon the anvil of this street. Okay, got just a couple more for you. Let me check the time, we're good. This one is called How to Clean a Boy. I come from a very long line of hunters. I don't hunt at all. I'm dressed on the outside how I feel on the inside. I'm not into hunting whatsoever, but my grandfather actually was in there's like a Guinness Book of World Records for hunting if you kill a big enough animal. And I almost said cantaloupe, he didn't kill a cantaloupe or an antelope. He killed a caribou. That was one of the biggest caribou of all time. I went hunting once. I wanted to play Pokemon instead. That did not stick at all. But this poem is called How to Clean a Boy. Actually, it would make more sense at first I read this poem. Sons of Cain. Hunting a ridge between Lockwood and Sizersville State Park. This is about that very first time hunting. Fire hisses my paw in full regalia. Us two orange bulbs of fluorescent death, hunkering among red oak and switches of witch hazel. I press the 243 tighter against my right shoulder, the eyepiece on its scope coring my wide white eye, juicing it down my soft sun-browned cheeks. So full of violence, and the lunch of Vienna sausages I'd upchucked secretly behind sweet birch, or maybe shagbark. I've never been good at IDing trees. Pa's left eye fires wild from me to the doe, from me to the doe, stomach acid still tugging on the trigger of my throat. Sweet Jesus, he's thinking so loud I can hear the brattling of slurs through my earplugs. Fire, you little pussy, your skin softer than split sausage. He'll chaw me between them ivory dentures. He'll turn my hide inside out, surer than any sure thing. I take stock of the brown doe, her bare head and pregnant belly, my crosshairs bobbing between exposed foreleg and shoulder. If I breathe life into a single bullet, dormant now in the chamber, hammer and pin, it will shatter her lungs. It will powder us into our most basic parts. And the follow-up poem is called How to Clean a Boy, or thinking of clean as in cleaning a deer. How to Clean a Boy. Triple check the joist hooked from your garage ceiling is rated for at least 97 pounds. Spear his calves with T-hanger, with gambrel, and let the rusty hitch of your truck do the hard work, pulling cord taut till he's vertical as Christ on a 2x4. Pray for the palms preparing supper, your very own. Slit the olive skin around his sissy boy ankles, and remember the key to good meat is separation from its fur. Grind your skinning knife sharper than obsidian. Blade incisions precise at 10 and 2 and steer his hide down toward the slop bucket, brim red with offal. Keep going or his body might warm into another kind of knee-jerk wriggling, like an unfrozen fish tossed silvery in a pond thawed of guilt and comatose motion. Not a kindness. Wash him gently with a hose. No, deep, undowned, he is only meat and bones. Wipe the blood, first from your floors, second, your conscience. Thanks so much.
Let's have another round of applause for our fabulous readers. Who I'm going to welcome back to the stage immediately so that they might take your questions. Captain Jack is going to be working the audience here. I'll be flipping through the YouTube comments, hoping that they're better than YouTube comments tend to be. But please, welcome back to the stage, Ben Kingsley and Sherry Reynolds.
You want us up there?
Yeah, so we can have a
Anybody have a question you'd like to ask Ben or Sherry? Somebody break the ice.
Hi, Sherry. It's me, Zoe.
Hey, Zoe.
I have a question for you. Not too long ago, I heard an interview with Sadie Smith. She was talking about how she was really trying to listen to people who seemed to believe very differently from her. She was specifically talking about politics and how some people, when Obama was elected, thought, oh my gosh, this man does not represent me at all. And she was really trying to understand what that would feel like. This is what she was saying in the interview. And of course, listening to rhetoric that she doesn't identify with now, she was trying to see how could I get into the mind of these people. So that's what I was thinking about as I was listening to you and this woman who we don't want to like. And so I just wanted to ask if you could say something about getting into the mind of someone who thinks very differently than you.
Thank you. That's a big question and a hard one. Well, I mean, I'm only interested in characters who are who have the capacity to screw up and recognize it, I guess. And I'm interested really as a writer in what makes somebody do something just either out of character or unbelievable in some way, and then kind of backing up and exploring that. Dory was a hard one. Anytime you start with a character who has participated in a hate crime, you have a big job if you're trying to make that person understandable to a reader. And I would say she was definitely the biggest challenge for the book for me at the beginning, certainly with the first pass through the book. And when I first finished this book and I sent it to my agent, she said it was just too brutal. And it was brutal. It's a rough book in some ways. The only thing I try to do is I try to drop enough promises in that a reader can sort of trust that I'm not going to take them someplace without getting them out of it. And maybe uncovering something in that process. And finally, I think that I probably did maybe a better job with Dory's character than I did with the other main character, that's Teresa. And I think that it's because she was a harder one from the start because I had given her this terrible piece. it seemed really important to me to try to explore, to show her guilt, and also to let her, like her sense of herself keep popping up, right? And I wasn't just trying to get at that piece of her, I was trying to get at her at that piece of her at that age. So it's been a really long time since I was 17. And so to try to get into the mind of somebody that would have, that would have been capable of this, and to understand how and why, and also to give that person a chance to kind of reckon with it and to make some peace with it, that was the challenge of the book. Thank you.
My question is for Ben. Hi. I read your 3 books, and one thing that I really liked in regards of all of it is the different structure. I know that in poetry you get creative in regards of how to format poems and how to use it. So I noticed that in your book you use a lot of like block stanzas, a lot of indents, right alignment, and some things. So my question is, how do you choose the structure of a piece of poetry? How do you make it different from associating it with the other poems?
Yeah. Okay, first of all, you're in my English 300 Introduction to Creative Writing class, Alanis. You read all 3 of my books. Oh my goodness. You had A+ already. Now A++++++. I can be very easily bribed, you will find. I hope none of my bosses are in this room with us. But that's such a great question. It's such a difficult question, right? The obvious answer that I hate to give, but is so true, is like it depends on the poem, right? Maybe by way of kind of answering the last question and your question. So the last question, right? How do we kind of write or empathize through, the eyes of the capital O other, or how do we talk or write through difficult topics? Maybe I could try and give an answer to both questions through this poem. Very weird to give an answer through a poem, but that might be the best way for me to talk about this. Where is that dang poem? So I'll read you the poem, it's not super long, and then kind of explain how the form and function maybe jive or fit together. So my great-grandfather was in the KKK. And I, right, am, I hope, very, very far away from that very, how do I say it, something pejorative heritage, right, that gross, disgusting heritage, right? But as a poet, I'm very interested in tensions. I'm very interested in what troubles and conflicts a character. So this poem is called Son of a Klansman's Daughter, and it's about my uncle. And the poem is in a, I don't use any fancy words, it's like a letter, okay? Or a biblical epistle, but not biblical. Dear Uncle, I heard you couldn't bear witness to a black woman climbing the ladder of opportunity that was one of your 26 peach trees. So you, quote, cut every last one of them fuckers down, end quote, with a chainsaw, blade, quote, right at the base. Quote, dusted them all in 10 minutes flat, ha. Hard, I thought about equivalencies for hate, maybe seeds, old trees, or an unyielding stump. The roots of a nurtured sprout, how strong the need for water, a steady source, how strong the need for kindness of sun. Maybe you, Uncle, are fragile. A decanter's mouth dripped into. Decades of gardeners passing until you became a man full of a different kind of seed, of a different kind of watering, of a kind of fruit. I want to ask if you ever loved that raised orchard, but of course we haven't spoken, since I was just a sprout, raised and watered beneath orchard branches, then budding with peach fuzz. Here I see myself again. I press a different tine, another kind of blade, deep into my body. I search right at the base. I root for a different kind of seed, of tree, of fruit. My mouth longing for the flavor of fresh water. So I had such a hard time writing this poem and empathizing. And the key in terms of form, like your question is asking, it was truly to write it as a letter, right? As a letter where I'm trying to complicate the character and take them out of the kind of stereotypical easy boxes and figure out what was actually going on there. Thank you.
Fantastic. And we have one more question. It's a tandem question for both of you all, so you can both approach the mic. It's a question from our colleague and poet laureate of the great state of Virginia, Louisa Gloria, who is curious to know, Sherry and Ben, if you felt like the way you write about place has changed in any fundamental way, from book to book or in general over the years.
So when I'm writing about place, I'm usually writing about one of two primary spots. One of them is the kind of the woody area of South Carolina that I grew up, and the other one is the eastern shore of Virginia where I live now. Generally speaking, the place is not the first thing I think about. I am interested in character, but a character is existing somewhere, and whatever they're dealing with is complicated by the backdrop that they're operating in. It's either something that they don't have to worry about too much, or it may be something that's causing them some stress or distress. So I've become more interested in that as I've gone along in my writing. I've become more attentive to that much later in my writing. But I think that was because as a younger writer, I was trying harder to get character and plot taken care of, and now I have more space to think about it.
I'm also coming from a really, really similar place. So, for example, I grew up in a trailer park, really rural Appalachian Rust Belt area. But I've gone to school in LA and in Philly. Now I wonderfully live here. You heard about West Baltimore. There's lots of different places happening, and a lot of times characters are born out of those places. And I do love to kind of fall into that, write what you know in terms of places, and the characters in the places tend to sync up well.
Well, thank you both again. Let's do one more round of applause. Thank you all for being here. I'm trying to drown out y'all's applause. It's ridiculous. The University Bookstore is here with copies of both Ben and Sherry's books for y'all to purchase and for them to sign. So let's do that. But once more, I want to thank you all for being here, both in person and virtually. Please join us at 7 p.m. in this very room or this very digital space for a reading by this semester's writer-in-residence, Gabrielle Calaparesi. And as ever, for the full schedule of events this week at ODU Lit Fest, please see the Literary Festival website. Thank you.